We're back. I'm JR. I'm with Dr. Robert Howard again. Hi, Dr. Robert. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good. We're here to go back onto, I can't resist this, we're going to take another journey into you, Dr. Robert, another journey to you. And this time, we're going back to the year 2007 or the year 2008, and we are going to be talking about Devil's Tavern. And I suppose the story of Devil's Tavern does start a little bit before you actually come to record the album, because the first thing we've got to talk about, is bringing the band back together. So, like I did before, I want to set up a little bit of the context for this. You'd just done the album with P.P. Arnold about a year before this.
Yep.
Before that, though, you'd had a few years when there hadn't been much new output. So what I want to ask is, did any of that relate to, and how long had the idea been brewing to bring the band back together? And was it you, or was it one of those who came to you, or was it just kind of a mutual thing that happened naturally?
Okay, well, I'll backtrack a little bit. So the Birds Gotta Fly was the solo album, I think 1999 or something like that, or 2000. And then I moved to Spain. And the first 5 years that we were in Spain, our kids were still young. We were moved to a new country. It was probably the only time in my life where I didn't put out an album. I mean, I recorded one. It was called Flutes and Bones. I recorded it in the house, and it did come out eventually online only. So I did.
Right.
But that's what I did in those first 5 years. And then things started to change. They got a bit older. I became less of a taxi driver, and also I needed a break. I needed to absorb a bit of what was happening to us and where we were and what we were doing, and it was full on. And we were building a house, and I was helping my wife do that. She was really in charge of that and everything. So it was a time when, for a while, music wasn't the primary thing in my life. Probably the only time that's ever happened. So then I meet P.P. Arnold at a party here, up in the valley where I live. And I'm singing some songs, as I always am, because I always got the guitar in the boot, and I'm singing a few Curtis tunes, and she joins in, and I know exactly who she is. So I start, First Cut is the deepest. And it's just somebody's party. It's just, friends in the valley and all that. And of course the light bulb goes on. Where do you live? Oh, I live down the coast. She's only 20 minutes from me. By this time, I know there's a studio down in a place called Matrill, which is a port town in Andalusia that a German guy runs, who's got this wonderful, lots of old analog gear. So I say to her, how about doing an album? And luckily she agreed, and I panicked. And I thought, oh God, well, I better write some songs. So I did that real quick, wrote the songs for her, contacted some old friends, Crispin on drums, Marco on bass, and we did that in the studio down in Montreal, and I started to get a taste for it again. We did some gigs together. It sort of got me back into playing live. We did a festival in Malta. We played some TV shows in Belfast. We did one great summer fest in Leicester. Can't remember what it's called, but what was really great about that was that when I looked out to the crowd, there was the unmistakable silhouette of John Cooper Clarke dancing in the dark. So I met him afterwards because he was playing the same festival. I think it was called Summer Sunday Fest, so it got my juices flowing again. And after having come to a place in the solo career where I was playing solo with acoustic guitar, I really like Birds Gotta Fly. I think it's probably my least known actually album, most underrated in some ways, but I was happy with it and thought, well, maybe I need to try something else. And I thought, well, if we're going to get a band together, there's only really, I miss being in a band. I miss that thing of the camaraderie, everything about being in a band. And there was only ever one band, so I thought, well, hey, we've got to, let's do it. Let me get in touch with everybody, see if they're up for it. I found a manager, a guy called Andy Davis, who had moved over here, who had a connection with Jonathan Ross and stuff like that. So Andy was a great help at the time. And
before you go on, can I ask a question then? Can I just butt in with a quick one? If two of them had said yes and one of them had said no, would you have had 3/4 of the Blow Monkeys?
Yes.
You would?
Yeah. I would have. Because you know, I knew that they wouldn't say that though. I knew that, you see, because we when we stopped, we were friends. We stopped, we were family. We were family. We are family. And, you know, there's a shared history. There's this incredible journey that we've been on throughout the 80s, from the very beginnings when it was really, really tough, and right through to all the kind of, you know, the American tour and doing American Bandstand and getting to that point of our lives. And then, you know, just everything that we went through together. So I went over to London and I met them in a pub and we talked about it. And everybody was just the same as they'd always been. Neb comes in and says, well, I'm not doing it for nothing. Let's make sure we get well paid. And Mick's asking, you know, what shape are the sandwiches backstage? And Tony's the rock, you know, keeps it all together. And so but I said, you know, the one thing that we're going to do, we will do some of those kind of rewind nostalgia type 80s things because that pays the bills, but we're making new records. We're going to make new records. You know, this is it. I wouldn't do it otherwise. And what's more, we're going to start with a record which takes us right back to kind of what we did pre-Digging Your Scene. Where, you know, the kind of influences that I was right back to my kind of Laughing Clown's birthday party, mixed with a kind of nascent kind of Bacharach and David kind of ethic, but, you know, I couldn't really get there because I wasn't good enough thing. You know, that was really limping in a way.
Yeah.
So so I thought the first thing we start off with is that double bass line on The World Can Wait, which takes you right back to Blow Monkeys circa 1982, really, before anybody knew us.
Well, on our when we did the Desert Planet picks, you ended up choosing a Laughing Clown song, which opens with the bass line, and it's not the same bass line, but clearly you've got that somewhere in the back of your head. Well, doing this album,
there's a song called "She's Hit" by The Birthday Party. Check it out, the bass line. Obviously, it's in that kind of timing, and it's got a bit of beef heart in it. It's got a bit of, you know, it's kind of not what we're really known for, put it that way. We've only ever heard Digging Your Scene. And so I knew that, you know, it would have been easier, or the more obvious thing would to go to a major record company and say, give us a budget and we'll make a record like Animal Magic. And we're going to come back and do that. I didn't want to do that. Maybe that might not happen, but I reckon I could have squeezed that out of someone. And that's not what I wanted to do. I really didn't. I really thought that I had no idea, first of all, if anyone would be interested out there, and second, or whether we would have been completely forgotten. But what I was determined to do was make the record that we wanted to make, the music that we enjoyed getting together to play. So I guess that it's a bit, for people that would have known us only for Digging and all that, it probably wasn't. It was a bit left field in parts.
But then, having said that, I don't think it sounds a million miles away from a lot of the rest of Animal Magic, because Digging Your Scene is just one sort of fraction of that album. And I think this album, I think it's clearly the work of the same people. It sounds like the work of the same people who've just a little bit older and a little bit more mature. And it sounds like the natural progression you would have made probably in about 10 years if you'd have stayed together. So it doesn't. So I've got to ask, here's the question that comes out of this. Because you've done by this point 5 solo albums, the one with P.B. Arnold, and it's been more than 15 years since the last Blow Monkeys record. When you started writing the songs for this one, are you actually sitting there thinking, this is for the Blow Monkeys? Or are you just writing songs and the fact that it's going to be the Blow Monkeys comes afterwards?
No, I'm thinking this is for the Blow Monkeys. I'm thinking this is going to have mixed bass on it. This is going to have some brass on it. But,
right.
You know, there are definitely elements of things in there that When Love Can Bloom or you know, When Love's in Bloom or things like, you know, which are kind of more more tuned to my solo stuff. But then, like you said, I mean, if you really check the albums, the B-side of Digging was "High Back to Winner."
High Back to Winner.
So
yeah.
there was always an element of Laurel and Hardy about us, in terms of music. I always was trying to write on the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia and Sons of the Pioneers and all that cool water. I loved all that stuff. It's all in there. And so the Blow Monkeys were a bit of an odd mix that way. So when people came to gigs expecting to see just Digging Your Scene plus a lot of other songs, that wasn't what they got. So we didn't really fit in that way. So in a way, Devil's Tavern is pretty true to our roots, really.
Absolutely. I think so. So, was it always going to be the plan that you'd record it in Spain because you'd now moved to Spain? Or was it one of those things where you had to discuss whether you'd come over to the UK to do it? And given that it was eventually recorded in Spain, did you rehearse in the UK or did you just move everybody over for a bit? Was there much of a rehearsal period? What was the period leading up to the recording?
Well, something that had happened to me in those intervening 15 years is that I'd done an awful lot of thinking about the recording process, and one thing that I decided that I wouldn't do is rehearse, because I really started to get results out of first takes and of that moment before self-consciousness kicks in when you're recording. It's not the way we worked in the 80s, because Grocer's Daughter took 6 months. I had to explain to them, this is what I want to do. This isn't the way we worked before, except when we were demoing. We had no budget. But we had no budget and we were demoing, really. That's what we were doing again. We got a little bit of crowdfunding to make this album, but there was no way I could fly over to London and sit in go in a posh studio and do all that. This was a German guy, had a studio locally. He had a couple of outhouses where people could stay. I said, come over, let's do that. And day one, just put the mics up, turn the machine on, we're ready to go. This is how it goes. Take one. That was really my aesthetic with this. That was really the thing. That was a major difference. And I was singing live as well. I was playing guitar, singing live. So instead of layering a record, I was using the techniques that I had become more familiar with and better at as I went through the solo thing, influenced by a lot of things that I listened to in the intervening years as well. So, and I think that was a change, because I think, obviously, we didn't do that with Neb. Neb is somebody who always likes to come in, listen to what we've done, and then add his bit, and that's fair enough. But with Mick and Tony, and they're both good enough to do that. I mean, Tony's the proper pro. He can do anything at the drop of a hat. And Mick is best to catch before he gets self-conscious about things as well. So it worked well for us.
Mick I think he's one of the great bass players.
Definitely.
Yeah,
right from the start, he was the best musician in the band. When he walked to the audition, and it was just Neb and I before we had a drummer, and he started slapping, and I'm not a fan of slapping, but I thought anyone who can do that can do anything. And then he started to use that fretless. Again, I wasn't a massive fan in the 80s, but he used it in a way that was his own. And I play a lot of bass. As you know, I played a lot of bass later on with Weller and all that, and I loved playing bass. I started off playing bass, but I could never figure out what the hell it was that he was doing. So I thought, well, that's good enough for me. There's something about the way Mick kind of weaves.
There's something, it's really fluid, isn't it?
Different.
Yeah.
He paints extraordinary kind of shapes and weaves his magic within songs, and with the bass, and it's never the obvious. So it gave us an identity as well, his bass sound, especially early on.
Yeah.
And I want to bear that again. I didn't tell him what to play. I mean, one or two that were based around the bass line, but in general, with Make Your Best, just letting him go.
Yeah, you can tell. And actually, across the course of the album, you've got Nigel Hopkins, who comes in. He does the sort of strings and that, and he's playing some pianos and organs and things on it. You've also got, I have to assume, your daughter is on one of the tracks playing violin.
Yeah, that's Bullet Train. I mean, that was something that I wrote. It was Christmas Day, and we were just sitting in the kitchen waiting for the turkey. And I was just playing the guitar, and she was learning violin. She would have only been in her very early teens, but she just played along. And I got it, and I caught it on the Zoom that I was putting this idea down, and we could never get that sound again. So we just took it off of the Zoom, and put it on that track, and it has a kind of spooky, weird, slightly out of tune, thing, which I love. That's how that ended up.
So obviously she was on hand to do well. But what about the other people who came in and did little bits? You've got Michelle Aragon and Mike Lazar on congas, backing vocals and congas, couple of tracks. Nigel Hopkins. Are these all people who came in from outside again? They weren't, or were they?
No, they didn't come in. I mean, I sent Nigel. That was the first time I'd ever worked with him. Tony said to me, "I've got this Welsh guy. He's a bit of a nutter, but he's brilliant." And that's Nigel, who obviously I've worked with quite a lot since. Like, he did these masterpieces on Journey to You.
Yeah.
First thing he sent us, he said, send him the backing track, and he'll send it back the next day down the phone line. So I sent him Welcome Wait, and he sent me back this thing, and I just was blown away. I just thought, God. So he did about 4 or 5 tracks like that while we were in the studio recording. We were only there for, like, in total 5 or 6 days. So we had to finish it. And then I think some of the other people, I sent a couple of tracks to be mixed by in America by a guy called Adam Mosley, who we worked with in the 80s. And he added the percussionist and a few bits and pieces here and there. But mostly we mixed it ourselves down in Montreal. But the only people in the studio with me at that time were the band before of us.
Yeah,
The first thing we did I remember the first thing when we first got together in the room after 15 years, the very first thing we did just to get the headphones working and get the sound was Man from Russia. And I said to the guy, we're just going to jam on something so you can get sound. We haven't played together for 15 years. Might be a bit ropey, but take it. So we did Man, and that I think was the best version of Man from Russia that we ever did. I think it's out there somewhere. It's the original slower version.
Yeah. It's on the B-side of Travelling Soul.
Is it? Thank you for telling me, because I can never remember.
And it's also on the DVD that was issued with the live version of...
Okay. So that's good. So, because that was how it kind of... Again, that's Mick and his incredible bass playing. So, but it was only ever the 4 of us in the studio, yeah.
And okay, before we talk a bit about the songs and about various things like that, let's move to the other end of it. Yeah. It was mixed in LA, according to the sleeve notes.
Yeah,
so
a couple. Like I said, I sent them to Adam Mosley.
Yeah, and
who worked at Silver Lake Studios, where it's quite a well-known studio. You know, like Beck and stuff, people like that. Prince, I think, had used it. And so he was an old friend from back in the 80s, because we worked with him. Some of the very early things that I produced, like Walking the Blue Beat and things like that.
Right.
He mixed. He helped me. And I started to muscle in on the production. So he was great. And he mixed a couple. I think he mixed I Dream of You and a few other things. Yeah.
But you never actually went out there with him. You basically sent the tracks and they...
No. The budget wouldn't have...
Well, I was going to say... Well, so talking of that then, this is another question I was going to ask, but I've gone slightly out of sequence because I think... Doing all the logistical stuff before we talk about the artistic stuff maybe is how we'll progress on this one. You did crowdfund it. Was that the first time? And obviously the cause of that decision is easy to see, but was it a difficult decision to take? How did you feel about that, sort of philosophically, I suppose?
I thought it was a great idea. I thought that it was I think it was just through our mailing list. I don't think we went through any intermediary site like those sites that appeared a few years later. I think it was that, and it was small. It was only a couple of grand. I mean, I think it was just enough to get us in the studio for 4 or 5 days. It seemed to be like the perfect solution. I mean, these people were going to get what they wanted with their names in artwork and all that thing, and they were contributing to something that obviously they wanted to. I mean,
they get the album, right?
Yeah, you can't strong arm people into supporting that. They either want to or they don't. And it just seemed to me like the best way that we could make the record that we really wanted to make without any interference.
Yeah, because you're actually doing something quite early on, I suppose. I mean, it's 14, 15 years ago. And that's before these days it's absolutely standard to crowdfund things, isn't it? But back then, even then, 15 years ago, it had been happening. But like you say, to much less of an extent. So in a way, you were kind of poking your noses out in front. But crowdfunding allows the artist and the audience to meet in the same space, the same sort of philosophical space, I suppose, which is not something that had previously happened before. Did that break certain barriers down, or it wasn't a problem in any way?
No, I mean, not really. No, I don't see how they were entering into my kind of space, really, other than...
No. Well, I mean...
Other than that they were part of the process.
Mm.
Part of the process of making it and bringing it to fruition. But obviously, people, I've crowdfunded other artists.
Oh, yeah.
What you do when you do that is that you're saying, I'm backing you. Off you go. You do it. I'm not trying to have a bit of you. I'm not trying to influence what you do.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just here to support you.
Well, and absolutely. I don't think you would want to influence somebody because presumably if you crowdfunded them, you want them to do their thing, right?
Exactly. You can't go, here's 10 quid. Could you do a song in B minor for me, please? 58 BPM.
Yeah.
Could you make it about animals? You can't do that.
I was just trying to work out, because I can't really remember what things were like back then. I was just trying to work out if there was any snobbery about it at the time, because things...
Probably give a fuck. Who cares?
Yeah. Things have changed so much over the years, though, haven't they?
There might have been some snobbery, but I think it's a far better thing to do than to sign to some multinational record company.
Yeah.
Who are spending half their money on I don't know, space ammunition. I don't know. It's not. There's nothing immoral about it. It seems to me to be a perfectly.
Oh no! Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, there might have been snobbery. Like there was snobbery about when we started out about playing certain festivals, like maybe what they might call 80s festivals.
Right.
Disappeared over the years because everything became like a level playing field because of the way the internet evolved. A lot of those barriers dissolved and a lot of those prejudice dissolved, including my own.
Yeah.
I must admit. But I thought, no, well, hang on, this is all nonsense because at the end of the day, you're playing to people that want to hear your music. And that's all there is to it. I have then the choice to say, I've also got new music for you to hear or not. And I mean, a lot of those, we are often the only band that will play an 80s festival that's made a new album or that's playing those songs in the set, which is, I'm glad of. But then again, we have this whole other thing where we're touring and we're not doing all that. So it all works. And I admit I had a little bit of reticence and snobbery about that. And that kind of fell away pretty quickly as I began to experience it. I
think, and I've said this to you before, I think balance in all things is the healthier way to go than fixating on either doing or not doing certain things. And like you say, having a prejudice about it. Because prejudice could be a prejudice for something as well as a prejudice against something. But I don't know, it just seems to me that finding balance is just going to make you a happier, healthier, more productive person.
It's one of the nicer things about getting older, is that you don't give a fuck, I mean, to be honest, we'll all be dead, we'll all be forgotten in the end. It doesn't really matter. There are people alive today who have never heard of Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
There are people that probably don't know anything about Elvis until this film's about to come out. It doesn't, let alone us, So, in the grand perspective, which is what you begin to get as you get older, if you're paying attention, it doesn't matter. We spend far too much. All that matters is just to try and to make the world a better place. To try to put out music which people can enjoy and get into, and that's really all there is to it. I mean, connect, just to connect.
Yeah, sure.
COVID showed us that.
Yeah.
How important that was.
Well, and
so, me worrying about how things are perceived or how I'm perceived, it's gone.
Talking of the perception of things, so here's a question that I was going to do much later, but yeah, I kind of jumping around on this one, but I kind of like that. I like it. So here we go. So you've recorded the album. It comes out on a label called Absolute. I'll ask you about that in a second. Because I mean it's copyrighted to you, so I'm not sure. But I'll ask you.
Absolute. They're just they were just the distributor.
Fair enough. Oh yes, of course. What was your sense of what was going on in the music press or just in the wider world in terms of, it had been, well, by the time it came out, it was nearly 20 years since the last Blow Monkeys one. Was there anticipation for it? Did you find you were sort of suddenly getting a lot more attention from people?
Not particularly. We didn't really make a big splash. We didn't take on any press agent, as far as I can remember. I think we might have done a few. We did Jonathan Ross radio show. We did a few bits and pieces. We did a sort of gig at the Jazz Cafe, I think was the one with that album, and the 100 Club. But it was more a gradual. We were finding our feet again, especially live. Live was, we were. Yeah, I was finding my feet again because I hadn't played and performed like that for a while. I needed to get back into. I needed to get match fit. I needed to get my confidence back a bit. Not that it ever really disappeared because I did a lot of stuff as a solo acoustic, and that's where you get really found out if you haven't got. So that was good for me, but at the same time, I was the leader of a band again. Mm. That responsibility, that position again, and of course we get on stage, and there are people in there for whom we might have meant something 20 years previous. And so that begins to come, So yeah, it's a different thing, but it was a gradual re-emergence. It was not a big, here they're back. I didn't want to do that. Because, we're not big enough to do that. It's not like, if, I don't know, the Jam got back tomorrow or something like that. We're kind of cultish, 80s cultish pop. People know us, everyone's heard us, but we're not so big that it's, yeah, and I think that's a nice place to be. Yeah, it's because I'm free. Yeah, because you don't have the expectation on you to do things a certain way. No, we're not bound. We're not bound by our past. We're not. We're proud of it, and we're free to do what we want in the present as well. Yeah, because you wouldn't have had the evolution and you wouldn't have had the more mature sound if a record company had been telling you you've got to do 11 versions of a particular sound. I mean, the record company, when we put out Springtime for the World is the last Blow Monkeys album, Devil's Tavern's the next. They don't sound like the same band, No. But there's a gap. But I mean, even from Animal Magic to Springtime, which is only 4 years, I think, or 3.5. 3 even, yeah. It's a very different. We moved too fast, really, for the public in terms of if we wanted to be that kind of phenomenal big pop success. They weren't going to dig Springtime for the World. And the record company also didn't understand it in the sense that I knew that La Passionara was going to be an Ibethan thing because I'd already sussed that the DJs were playing it. And I said, you need to make a travelogue type video. This will be a hit. Oh, but you're not singing on it. I said, doesn't matter. This is where it's going. They couldn't read the rooms, So we were always a bit like that, But in a sense, that brought us freedom. We weren't confined by our own success to such a degree that we kept having to copy it. And as a fan, one of the things about a band like that and an evolution like that and a diversity within the canon like that is there's so much difference between some of the records. There's always going to be bits you don't like, but I think what you can appreciate is that the artist is not treading water and that the artist is, because even amongst the records that you've made since you got back together, so I'm leaping way on ahead here, I think that the sort of 6 albums you've made since you got back together share a DNA
more so than the 5 that you made when you were originally together. But still, there's vast differences between them. And I think what you do that's nice is that you kind of, and I suppose I'm using this as a kind of segue into talking about the songs. On the albums you've done since, each time you do one, you seem to lean into a certain type of thing. Like Staring at the Sea, I guess, leans slightly more into the sort of folky bluesy end of what you do. Whereas, If Not Now, When, obviously leans more into the glam rock, right? And I think each of them leans a little bit this way or that, but they all sort of lean from a certain central pivoting point. This one, I think this one feels kind of like a sort of, it's kind of funky. Sometimes it's really obviously funky. Sometimes it's slightly less so. But I think this one leans into a sort of folky, funky sort of area. Was that like a deliberate choice, or was that just what was coming to you at the time? Did you actually think, well, I need to do it like this because it's the band? In other words, I suppose.
No, not really. I didn't think it through that much. I just wrote a set of songs and thought these will work with the band. That one might not, this one might. But kind of knowing the way they play and the way that things have evolved. But no, I didn't analyze it that much. I think there's subconsciously you're aware that you never want to repeat yourself. I mean, I never do anyway. There's not much point in that. So you're always trying to find something new, because the thing about songwriters is that I think that I've heard people say, and it resonates with me, is that you really need to surprise yourself first. If it doesn't turn you on, if you don't like what you're doing, if there's not a spark there, no one else is going to react to it. So that's that kind of bullshit detector in myself has become much more attuned. Like, I can put a song to bed quicker if I know that I'm going down a rabbit hole there. That's not worth it. Or something that happens very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I'll value it because I don't want to overthink it. Whereas before I wouldn't have had the confidence. So, but no, to answer your question, no, it's not that. There's not that much thought. I mean, the thing about writing songs is it's physical and it's emotional. It's not so much intellectual.
I guess you could possibly say then that when you came together, it's where you all were psychologically at the time. Kind of, because it does feel, I mean, there's vast differences between the 11 songs on this album, but they do feel at the same time like a coherent whole. So there is a sort of theme across the album, I think. I wonder then, it's just that's where you were psychologically at the time, and that's what the sort of 4 of you made when you came together. And so as much as, say, something like Frontline and something like Only Joking are miles apart, and yet they're both, well, one of them's got a funky overcurrent, but Frontline's also got a slightly funky undercurrent. And so you can tell that that it comes from the same place, despite how different they end up sounding.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I guess, my my inherent kind of feel on guitar is a kind of folk funk thing. I mean, you could say that something like Don't Let It Slip is the archetype of that, so that's when I play, that's my feel, that's where I'm feeling comfortable. And so things like Frontline, and they swing in a slightly kind of, technically it's like a slightly dotted beat. I always used to think about Bolan in the sense that people always miss the point about him, is that he was such an amazing rhythm guitarist in the way that Chuck Berry was. That everything that he did had feel. It had this incredible boogie, like Keith Richards does when he played with Charlie Watts. There's a thing that goes on. Well, my thing is often with Mick, where I play the drums and everything on the guitar, and Mick will start to weave, and that's the beginning. And that's Blow Monkeys for me. And then Nev will come in and do his thing. And the other thing that on this album, having listened to it recently, I can see that there's a theme lyrically. There's definitely a theme lyrically which ties things as diverse as Save Me and all of them together. And there's a kind of emotional opening up, a kind of emotion, it's soul like confessional. Save me, you know. You don't have to be a psychiatrist to read what the guy's saying, and the guy is me, but I'm able to say that distance because it is a while ago, and but I can see that there was a mindset, there was something in there that needed to come out about change and about what everybody had been through. So I think that's one of the things that ties it together.
It feels, and it does, and it never specifies it. I think lyrically it feels a little bit like it's you're writing to Michelle about the big life move that you've made in relocating to Spain. So it's kind of, it feels like you're consolidating your relationship and your relationship with your environment.
Well, I'm always writing to Michelle.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Because she's given me so much, you know. I mean, she's opened my eyes to so much. I love to see the world through her eyes. She's very, whereas I've lived a lot of my life inside my head. She's always looking out.
Well, she's a beautiful photographer. Apart from anything else.
Amazing photographer. She's, you know, and she says things, and often, you know, that's a song for me. I've got it. Right. Thank you very much. I'll take that. And the way that you're looking and the things that you're observing and things. So, you know, I think that's how I write anyway. I've always enjoyed picking up on what people say in conversations and overhearing things and snatches of conversation and stuff. So I'm not really a storyteller, you know. I'm more of an impressionist in that sense. I like to, and so that's really what it's about for me. And I'm still working it out. And you'll never stop working it out. So, but this, I can hear that the maturity from that compared to, say, Animal Magic or Limping. And Animal Magic and Limping, I'm not dissing them, because now I see, oh, that's a young person that really wanted to be heard. You know, I can hear Limping, and wow, that's quite brave. You didn't have a clue what you were doing, did you? You know, the million, like, she's shedding skin, the way it changes form all the time. And fast and slow, and an Elvis bit, and there's a bit there that sounds like, you know, that and this. I mean, that's me just like, that's honest, because that's where I was. But then by the time we get to Devil's Tavern, you know, I can hear a life that's been led in between. Yeah, I mean, it's odd to speak in the third person about myself like that. I don't want to get into that shit, but that's how it feels when you look back at a record like that. They're like diaries.
Yeah, also, I've got to say, I have written songs. I have been a person who writes songs.
Yeah.
And the thing is, once you've written something, I completely understand. Once you've written something, it then feels like something that somebody else did, because it's done and you've moved on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And they act like diaries. They act like, you know, signposts.
Yeah, sure.
Reminders.
One last question, and I didn't want to finish on this, so I'm going to ask it now before we talk a little bit about the songs. We might not go through all of them in as much depth as we did with Realms of Gold, but on the album, in the sleeve notes, there's a thing. It says, R.I.P. Graham Opdahl, original BM. So what's that all about? Because I don't know.
Graham was a friend of Neb's.
Right.
And so when I came back from Australia in 1981, I answered an ad in the back of Melody Maker, like everybody used to do in those days. And it said, I think, angular guitarist wanted, Ferry Bowie or something like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, all right, I'll go. So I went along to Jackson's Lane Community Centre in Highgate. And there was a guy, tall, slim guy with long black hair, who looked just like Brian Ferry, and next to him was Neville with a quiff and a saxophone, and that was Graham. And Graham was the original singer, and so he had a couple of songs.
Right. Yeah.
I went in and I played guitar, and they liked what I did, and we said, well, we'll have another rehearsal. And to the second rehearsal, I think I must have brought about 10 songs along, and of course I sang them because he didn't know them. And, And then it became obvious to Nev and I that we should now form a band. But Nev and Graham had come down from Scotland together. They were raised in school, and Graham sort of hung around a little bit, but it was obvious that we were going to move in a different direction. So he was really the original Blow Monkeys singer.
Yeah, sure.
We didn't call ourselves the Blow Monkeys at the time. And lovely guy.
He's like the guy that William Shatner replaced in Star Trek.
Yeah, you could say that. And and Graham, unfortunately, Graham never really recovered from an alcohol problem, so he died quite young. So really, it was around that time that we made the album, I think. So it felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah,
He was the original Blow Monkey, if you like.
Wow. Right, let's talk about the songs, at least a bit. And one thing that I've always noticed with this album, like I bought this album, I think on the day of release in 2008, and I put it on and I had all your solo albums, and I was sort of like, obviously very familiar with your solo work. And the first thing that surprised me about this album, because I kind of picked it up and I kind of figured it was probably going to be a little bit more like your solo work than it would be like the original Blow Monkeys albums, but that hopefully it would find a happy place somewhere in between. And then The World Can Wait comes on, and kind of musically, I think it was basically what I'd been expecting. I hadn't expected anything in particular, but it didn't sort of upset me. It didn't upset my expectations in any way. And then you start singing, and the funny thing is, the verse in The World Can Wait is so much not a singer-songwriter doing the singer-songwritery thing of singing over the backing track. You've got a backing vocal that comes on there with it, and it's not sort of talk singing, but there's something about the singing in that first bit that's kind of more ethereal, that's very different, and doesn't sound remotely like either your solo stuff or the Blow Monkeys stuff. And then after that, it kind of normalizes a bit. But it almost felt like with that first track and with that slightly strange vocal that you were making a bit of a statement. If you had any expectations, here we are, we're going to flounder those expectations. And now I've said that, you're going to say, well, we didn't really think about it. But did you think about it? Was that a deliberate choice?
I knew that it wasn't something that people would be familiar with hearing me do. It was more influenced by West Coast. Like, I'd been listening a lot to a David Crosby album called If Only I Could Remember My Name, where he does all these extraordinary like backing vocal things and harmonies and stuff. And I wanted to experiment a bit with that, and I tried a different vocal on it. It didn't seem to work. I didn't want to take away from the kind of psychedelic kind of double bass in 3/4 time and it felt like it should be more like a musical part than a lead vocal that took your thing. And then it hits the chorus where I'm in sort of Bacharach territory again.
Yeah.
And that's me. And I thought, that's cool. That's a cool way, because that will confound a few people. I was thinking of starting it with When Love's in Bloom, actually. But in a funny sort of way, that's kind of more, people would recognize that part of me. So I thought, that is about as different as it gets on this album. Let's go with that. So there was a little bit of that in there. It wasn't totally just a surprise.
For what it's worth, I think The World Can Wait is one of your great songs, to be honest. We spoke briefly before we started recording about an article that Dave Ross had just written on Toppermost, where he picks one song from each of your albums as a kind of playlist. Yeah. If I was to choose a song from this album, I might choose Save Me, because that's an obvious choice, but The World Can Wait, I think it's such a strong piece of music.
Yeah, I'd go with The World Can Wait, for sure. It's my favourite on there too, just because I think we nailed it. And you know, Tony's a jazzer. Tony was a Welsh youth jazz orchestra prodigy when he was a young Welshman in Swansea.
Right.
And so he had the chops. He's got the chops.
Yeah.
To do that shit. So that changes everything. So no, I agree with you. Actually, I think that's the one.
It also does something in the chorus that I don't think people who've never written a song would notice. And you do it on Digging Your Scene, right? And I didn't even notice it on Digging Your Scene until I heard the acoustic version that came out with Feels Like a New Morning. But there's a certain chord sequence that you can do that's, because a lot of bands, and indie bands especially, will just do like the 3-chord trick. Oasis, once you've heard the first chorus, the first chord in an Oasis song, you know what the next one's going to be. You know what the one that's coming after that. There's a thing that bands do, and I say I wrote songs. I wasn't a songwriter, and I certainly wasn't a musician, but you can change between major and minor chords, and there's a thing where you can just diminish certain parts of a chord, and I don't know the proper way of describing it, but it gives you a really haunting quality. Not necessarily melancholy or miserable, but just haunting. A chord change that can do something that sets the hairs up on the back of your neck. And you can't do it in every song, because if you did it in every song, it would become boring and trite, and it would become the thing you do. But it happens in the chorus of The World Can Wait, and it happens in the chorus of Digging Your Scene. And I think when it turns up and surprises you, and the orchestration disguises it so that you don't even know that it's happening, I think that's when songs turn from good songs into truly great songs. And I think that's why The World Can Wait and Digging Your Scene are amongst the great songs, if you know what I mean. So
I'm not going to argue with you.
So that's me being a fan.
I hear those tricks all the time. Lennon was great at it. Lennon did it with timings. If you listen to Instant Karma,
yes,
changes, even All You Need Is Love. I mean, you just try playing All You Need Is Love.
I did.
You think it's the most simple song in the world. It's not. The time changes. Yeah. Another Bowie was a genius. I often sit around with acoustic guitar and at parties and stuff because as I just do. And someone will say, play a David Bowie song, and you think, fuck. You suddenly start playing Life on Mars, and you realise you can't. It's for piano. It's just there are so many complexities and subtleties. Even Golden Years, it's got these amazing little chord changes. And that's something that I did study when I was younger.
Well, I was going to say
Davis was another one. What's going on here? It's mathematics, basically.
Well, that kind of infuses this whole album, I think. I've made a point that On the World Can Wait is where it particularly works for me. But say, for example, I Don't Mind, the second track, when you get to the chorus of that, it's got this really fun, lively, really incredibly, insanely catchy verse. And then when you get to the chorus, instead of going into a standard chorus of a standard pop song like you might expect it to, it suddenly does this bit where it does build, delay, build, explode. And then you're back into the verse. And it's almost, the first time you hear it, you're sitting there thinking, what the hell happened there? But again, I think that's another example of what you're talking about, where you're studying how to make music work in a different way from the way you might expect it just.
Well, listen, I'm a sucker for time changes. I mean, Animal Magic, the song, has got that thing. I could tell you that when I was listening to something like Jitterbug Love, which was a B-side by T-Rex, check it out. The way, I know it's Danny Baker's favourite T-Rex song. The way it just goes dum dum dum, and then it just slows right down for the chorus, and you think, no, it's gone, but it actually ratchets up in intensity.
Yes.
And so that's what I'm trying to do there, because the verses are very. I mean, I thought, okay, we'll follow World Can Wait with something which sounds instantly like the Blind Monkeys, and I thought the verses that I Don't Mind do. The minute you come in, I go ba ba da ba da ba ba ba, and it's oh yeah, that's the Blind Monkeys.
Yeah.
Funky, good words, nice melody, nice. Oh, hang on, where's the chorus gone? I like that.
And skipping ahead, Frontline kind of essentially does same sort of thing. Just takes a different angle on it, but kind of does that same sort of thing. But because in between, you've got the Bullet Train, and afterwards you've got a momentary fall. So a momentary, is it 12-string guitar and a momentary fall? It sounds like it to me, but then I'm an amateur, so
I think there is a 12-string on it, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And the Bullet Train does this. The Bullet Train is the first point where I think that sort of funkiness that I was talking about becomes apparent.
Yeah.
And the Bullet Train sounds like a really classic, I want to say Motown. I'm not sure if that's quite right, but it sounds like a really properly classic 60s type tune done with sort of noughties production values. It's fantastic.
I think we played it better live actually in the end because I got my Neil Young guitar sound going. But I mean, it was
right.
Yeah, it has that. Yeah, the drums and bass on it are fantastic because they just relentless and it's just sort of unusual feel for us. In fact, I'm going to go back to that feel or something. But that's nice. Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that one.
Oh, and what's really nice about it, because what you've just said about the relentless bass and drums, absolutely. Yeah. But I don't think that... See, I think a lot of music, especially modern music, I don't know, for me at least, doesn't work if it doesn't appreciate that you need shade for the light or light for the shade. And what I love about the Bullet Train is it feels like it's going to be relentless, and then you suddenly get a refrain, Climb on Board, where it just steps back, allows you a bit of breathing room before it gets back into the funky aspect of it. That's what makes it really work.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to what we were saying just now about, the sort of mathematics of music, I suppose, is one way of describing it.
Yeah. I mean, I was shit at maths. but there is a math, in fact, I failed my 11 plus because of math. But there is a...
But as a musician, I think you have to have a certain amount of maths in your brain.
For sure. There's a relationship. You have to... Otherwise, you're stuck in 3-chord.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, someone like Neil Diamond is interesting because if you analyse his songs, there's nothing clever in there, chord-wise. He doesn't change key. He doesn't even... He just manages to make it work sometimes within just 3 chords.
Yeah.
It's just very clever. He's a bit of a creep, but it's okay. He wrote some great songs. But so everyone's got their own thing, and he found he could do that. He could still create magic within such a confined space. Chuck Berry did that too for a small time when he was writing these marvelous, amazing songs with genius lyrics. But I'm a bit more ambitious for that, and I listen to a lot of stuff, and it all goes in and it all comes out, and a lot of that kind of relationship between chords and creating magic is mathematical.
Yeah.
Analyze it too much, but there is you do have to know your onions a bit.
I used to work a lot with the drum machine, and I remember one of the things about the drum machine was if you just put it on and got it to work in sort of factory settings, it was so rigid, 4/4, and there was no rhythm to it. There was no life about it. But it had this thing, and I can't for the life of remember what it was called because this was 20 years ago. There was a thing you could change on the settings, and what it did was you had a knob, and the knob, the more you changed it, the more it funkied things up. It would set the rhythm in between the beats. Yeah. And I remember there was a perfect setting that was about halfway that was just about as funky as I needed and not so funky that I got swamped or lost in it. I wonder actually if you've got an internal setting like that of your own, because I haven't seen you live especially, I don't know, and whether you're sort of calibrated to the setting and that's why I like your song so much because, I don't know, somewhere inside I've got a natural affinity with what you're doing. But do you know what I mean? I think as an artist, you have this particular program inside yourself that you can't help but have a slightly sort of funky edge to the folk, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying earlier. My natural go-to rhythm isn't really learned; it's just in there. That's just where I come from. So, and I don't fight it too often sometimes because that's sometimes I think no, that's too slow. But no, hang on. If I go any faster, it's not swinging. It's got to swing. It's got to even rock. And I don't do much kind of straight out rock. But even that, it's got to swing. That's why I think even when I kind of went to drum machines and I started dance music stuff, I was quite good at it because I had a good feel for programming drum machines because of what you just said, the in-between bit, the bit that's just, it's all subjective, but I trust my instincts on that.
Yeah.
And I know exactly what you mean because I relate to people. Neil Young's got it. He plays incredibly slow, and yet he's so slow that the whole thing opens up like this, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
When he's just playing, just him with a band like Crazy Horse, who are meat and potatoes. They should have been called meat and potatoes, but they're brilliant because they just play just behind the beat, and he just behind the beat.
Yeah, that's it.
Everything just opens up like a great big juicy universal clam, and inside it is, I'm getting my metaphors mixed up anyway, but oysters, you know what I mean?
But I know exactly what you mean, and I think there's a single word that kind of represents it in a way, and it's texture. Texture, because that's what it is. It's the texture of the song. And you hear so many songs on the radio that have got plenty of content, but no texture.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah, absolutely. Or you could just say feel. It's it's really important.
Absolutely. Right, we're massively overrunning from what we were expecting to do.
Okay.
So, because we were going to try and bring this one in well inside an hour.
Too much.
A momentary fall then, very briefly. That feels like you trying to write... And it feels like you're trying to write a Dr. Robert song for the Blow Monkeys to play, if you know what I mean. It feels a bit more like something that might have been on the solo albums, but sort of recalibrated for the band. Do you think that's a fair comment? Or... It's a lovely song.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. It's got that time change thing. We played it live for a while. It was really good. It might be something that I might dig out again, but I know the band really enjoyed playing it. It was something that we probably hadn't done as a band before, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's related a bit to some of the solo things, yeah.
And then you've got We Can Win, which for me kind of, and I don't know how you feel about me saying this, it's got kind of a 50s feel. It feels like a 50s, sort of slightly up-tempo, but smoky, sort of jazzy, kind of... Yeah. It's a swing track, basically.
I mean, it's one of those, it just was like, it was almost written on the spot. I think I had the chord sequence, and I just said, let's roll it. I did make up the lyrics, I think.
Wow.
Because that I might have had some key words, but it was one of them. I liked what I was hearing in the headphones. Tony was just playing something on. We were just jamming. He was playing brushes, and it's one of them. I said, okay, 4 chords. Here we go, and it was I like it. It's very light. But it's a lovely mood to it. I think
it's breezy, and it's right in the middle of the album. Because some of the things on the album, The World Can Wait. As much as I love The World Can Wait, and I've said it's one of the great songs. But there's sometimes with those, there's a sort of slight sense of portentousness, and you need something like We Can Win to counterbalance that by being so light and breezy.
I mean, I wouldn't describe this album as light and breezy.
No,
it's not. It's quite intense.
In places, and the next song, Only Joking. I think that's as near as you've ever come to doing, and I hesitate to use the term a comedy song, because that's not quite what I mean. But Only Joking is as near as you've come, I think, to just doing something just for the sheer amusement of it to yourself, it feels like almost.
Another one that was made up in the studio.
Right.
At the time. Just, just to highlight a bit of mixed, incredible bass playing. It was, there's not too much to say about that. It is what it is. But I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's got...
Comedy records, we have, Don't Give It Up, that's a comedy record in a sense, We have done a few. You know what I mean? It's always a kind of funky lightness, but I try to get stuff in there that elevates it.
You've never done anything that sounds ridiculously sort of, and like a... But as near as you come is this, and, and... That's a really nice moment in the middle of the album between those two songs to sort of take stock before you move into the sort of last sort of 3 or 4. Because I Dream of You is next, which is a lovely pop song.
Yeah.
And feels kind of, feels like slightly sort of, it doesn't feel like an indie track, but it feels like as close as you're going to get to sort of an indie pop song, if you know what I mean. But still with that.
It's an odd one. It's got a kind of, somebody said, the chorus sounds like Jethro Tull.
Oh, really?
But I understand what they're saying, that because it's in the funny timing.
Yeah.
Actually, it's one of my favourites on there. After Welcome Wait, because it's just a bit odd. It's just it is pop, but not in the way that you would expect it. Chord changes and the kind of It's got a little bit of kind of Sid Barrett about it too in the chord, in the verses, a little
Well,
bit of that kind of thing. You know?
I was just going to say, it doesn't sound 1,000 miles away from something like Radiohead, but kind of a more upbeat Radiohead. And I don't mean it sounds like Radiohead, but you know what I mean? It's sort of in that ballpark. But then Sid Barrett was obviously a massive influence on Radiohead, so you can see the ideas all sort of coming together there. Yeah. Travelling Soul is next. For me, I mentioned to you before I was a massive fan of Simon and Garfunkel. For me, Travelling Soul feels like your the name of it's gone right out of my head. The Simon and Garfunkel song about being on the road. It's got that lovely folkish Homeward Bound, of course. Yeah, this is your Homeward Bound. It's got that on the road, lovely lilting, folkish, but with all the texture that you bring to it.
Well, this is something where we hadn't gone before as a band, for sure. This is my solo work coming out. So I would sit and play the guitar with my fingers on this one, picking it.
Yeah, yeah.
For a start, it's a different dynamic. Rush's I love his sax on this. It's totally, he's...
Well, I was just going to say, yeah.
It's totally one take, and they've got that. There's no effect on it. It's dry. He just stood in the corner of the room, miles away from the mic to get the room sound, and he nailed it. He just got right into the feel of it, and it just helps it drift along. And I just wanted to just drift past, and I didn't want to impose myself as the singer on it. I wanted just to subsume myself into the backing track and for it to move as one.
And that bit where the sax comes in, because when the sax comes in, the sort of bass and the drums kind of just slightly raised to meet it. Yeah. And that bit just feels like that whole track. The whole track is lovely anyway, but that bit just feels like a flower coming into bloom or something. It's just, it suddenly becomes colourful and beautiful, but still keeps that lightness of touch. I think that's another great, great song.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of Neville's best ever saxophone Low Monkey moments, because I can hear that he's not thinking about that. He's not thinking at all about what he's playing. There's no attempt to do any kind of impression. He's just fitting into the track.
Yeah.
Like he's enjoying it, and it's wonderful. I love it.
And then that's followed by Save Me. Have you ever heard speaking of which, there's a remix on YouTube that I think is an unofficial one that somebody did that's very sort of modern and clubbish. Yeah. That's quite nice, actually.
It's a good one. I mean, it's a good one. I mean, Save Me started off as an acoustic song based around two chords. They're not even full chords, they were open ringing chords. And then as I started to play it with the band, I realised it's a soul song. It's got a beat. I had to work hard to get the beat right on this rhythm, because it has to. Anything that's too straight just killed it. So we had to find the space to put where the snare and where the bass drum would fit. It's really important to get that right, because I was playing a lot on initially of rhythm, and then again, and then it becomes the.
Well, this is your Bacharach and David moment.
Lyrically, it's obvious what it's about. It's all in the I mean, there's no obfuscation there. It's all in the open. This is what it's about. This is what this guy is asking. And so it's for some people. I think it's a bit of a highlight on. I think Nigel did a marvelous job. But I wasn't expecting him to do that 7-minute thing. I was going to fade it after 3.5 minutes, but he did so much. I forgot to fade it when I sent it to him, so he did the whole thing.
Wow!
He built this incredible crescendo that just carries on going like this, and it's one of those. You can just drift off with it. I disappear from the song, and the thing just keeps going like this. And I like
it's
that.
Lovely.
Yeah.
It feels like, and sort of. Well, the way you've described the finished version as accidental doesn't diminish the fact that the reason it goes on so long must have been because you were enjoying playing it as a band, which I think you can hear. Yeah,
it's one of those circular chord sequences that you just don't want to stop. You're doing it. It feels good, and I'm thinking, no, I'll edit this because these last 40 bars are the best, and we'll start there. But then when I listened back to it, I was wrong, and it all worked. And I thought, well, what what the hell? Just put it out. If somebody doesn't want to hear the whole 7 minutes, they'll hit the button, you know.
Yeah. But you know what? In terms of... Because here's a question. Maybe this is a question I'll dig into next time. I'll save this one for next time. So, Save Me, you've got this long sort of 4-minute section where you barely appear as a vocalist. And I think as a person listening to the album, you kind of feel like that's the end of the record. Because it feels like one of those ones where the last track will go on for a bit after the singer's finished to sort of take you to the end of the record. And then you've got this short, light, easy, very different thing called When Love's in Bloom at the end, which feels like a coda almost. Not a coda in the sense that has less value than anything else on the record, but it feels like a coda in the sort of psychology of how you've listened to the record, in that you feel like the album's finished, and then you get this little bit more. And you said a minute ago that you almost thought of putting this on first. So I've got to ask, how do you think it fits as a last track? Does it work?
Yeah, I think it does, because lyrically, in a funny sort of way,
it sums it up.
It sums it up. This is what it's about, really. In the end, this is what we're all searching for, or I am, or the writer of that record was, or whatever, however you want to put it. And it has a kind of humour to it as well. I mean, it's sort of pixie rock. It's sort of, and Nev plays a whistle, and he could never get the. It's the most simple line in the world. Da, 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 ba, 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 ba. That's all it is. But because it's got slightly weird timing, sometimes Nev gets the thing stuck in his head and the timing's wrong. And so we were in fits of laughter when he was doing this, ba, 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 this kind of gremlin, kind of elfin sort of line that he kept putting in the wrong place. So after about 50 takes of him putting it in the wrong place, we decided we'll keep it there, Nev. That's where it belongs. So every time I listen to it now, I just can't help but break into fits of laughter, because I can remember being in the studio with him and his tears rolling down his eyes. he knew that we were going to keep this. This is where it was going to be. And you know, like if you get locked into a certain way of thinking, you can't hear where the one is. You can't hear where the beat is.
Yeah.
You're hearing it differently. And Nev is a natural jazzer, and sometimes that's how it goes. And thank God he plays the sax, because the sax you can get away with anything on the sax. Not this in. He can come in the most odd places, and it's great. Sometimes, that's great. And I secretly know that's because you missed the cue. But it's cool. Me and Nev have known each other for 40 years, and we've always had this relationship. And that's kind of a magic thing, because I can't really control what he does. But this time he was playing this funny little pixie sort of whistle thing, and it was just hilarious. So I thought, there's love and laughter in this tune. That has to be how we end it.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Right, I guess that's us on The Devil's Tavern. Robert, next time we are, and this is for the people on the video, so I'm going to have to, I realised I didn't do this last time, so for the people who are listening but not watching, I'm holding up a copy of Limping for a Generation.
Uh-huh.
So next time we'll do the other first album, which is your first album, but also there's that version of it. So I don't know, I guess as part of the conversation, we might ask how this amazing sleeve that's insane and looks like something that Pablo Picasso might have come up with if he'd been making records, became something that obviously a record company had put together for the sake of... but I guess that, in a nutshell, slightly maybe the story of how the Blood Monkeys got started. But we'll dig into that next time around.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
It certainly is. It's been a great pleasure catching up on another fantastic album. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, JR. My pleasure.
And we'll do this all over again very soon.